Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Deidre Guy, and I am the president and founder of the Inclusive Workplace and Supply Council of Canada. From here on in to be known as IWSCC because it's an awful lot shorter to say. We support disabled and veteran entrepreneurs through official certification as diverse suppliers in Canada. So if you want to know more about supplier diversity, if you have a disability and you own a business, if you're a veteran and you own a business, or a combo of the two, check us out because we can probably give you some great support for your networking. Our show is produced by Pod Supply, and if you're watching this on YouTube, features ASL interpretation, sponsored by RBC Royal Bank for 2023, and supplied by Maple Communications Canada. So I'm pretty happy today to be joined with someone that I don't know real well, but as I get to know him each time, we have a good laugh, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about him. So Connor, and you know what, Connor, I'm not even sure I'm going to pronounce your last name correctly, but is it Atchison, just as it's spelled?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, perfect. Okay, I was thinking, well, what if it's Atchison and I've got it all wrong? But anyway, now I've said it both ways. So thank you so much for being here. And just tell us a little bit about yourself and what it is that you do.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me on the podcast. My name is Connor Atchison, and I'm the CEO and founder of Wisedocs. And the business is based on a tech platform that organizes, summarizes, and sorts medical records. So it uses a lot of fancy AI and a lot of buzzwords, but it's some pretty interesting stuff to help individuals in the claims process.
So are these medical records that are on paper, or are they also electronic? Does it work on both? Are there even medical records on paper much anymore?
Funny enough, you say that there is actually a lot of organizations that still have that manual process of paper. But really, our software and our platform ingest the digital and structured format of that medical record. So everything's been scanned and uploaded, typically PDF, images, TIFF, all the things you really don't want to work with because it's so noisy and difficult to navigate.
And I would think you'd have to have a decent amount of education or specialization to be able to effectively sort this information so that it gets categorized correctly.
Yeah, there's an entire industry around the insurance, the healthcare system, anything that's touching that medical data,
Right.
from a back office to a clinician to a nurse, case managers. There's so many different variabilities on what you're trying to pull from that record to help the individual claimant or the patient.
Right. So you talked about health claims and insurance, and obviously for what you're doing, I mean, even from my limited knowledge, it seems like medical insurance fields are the market for what you do. But are there other industries that you get involved with that we might not automatically think of when we think of this type of service?
Yeah, I think it's really, I always say, you want to try to apply it in so many different areas, but really the bread and butter for what we do and where we have the most impact and where we actually can help people the most is anything around that medical record attached to a claim. So that could be a claim from an insurer. It could be something you're reviewing at a hospital, but anything to do with the claim and the medical record, that's our sweet spot and our where we've built the business around.
Okay, well, that makes sense. So you recently became a certified supplier with IWSCC, which is our organization that I spoke about earlier. And I'm just curious, I don't often ask people this, and I really should more. Maybe we'll do a survey. I'll jot that down for later. But so what led you to IWSCC, and what did supplier diversity, I guess, what did it mean for you, if you can recall, before you got certified, as you were coming to that decision? And then now, since you're certified, has that changed at all, or what was your perspectives?
Yeah, I think it was just, it's such a fitting certification for us as a culture and an organization. When I look back and I first started the business and there's only a few employees and where it's grown now, and you really look at the makeup of what that culture is and what that team is. And we have over 55% of our workforce being women and 75% employees from diverse backgrounds. And 40% of leadership is within that demographic as well. And then myself, spending over 12 years in the Canadian Armed Forces, as a service member, veteran, that kind of all kind of came together, and it just really emulates who we are as a company and a team. And I think it's just something great to stand behind and support, but also get that recognition for all the hard work that the team's doing and how diverse and inclusive we actually are.
So, and so have you had an opportunity to get involved with any of the sort of matchmaking opportunities? Have you been reaching out to our corporate members to see how much they want to spend with your company? How's that been going so far?
Yeah, so we really just started in the new year, and
Right.
we're starting to actively get more involved. And I think for us, it's because we are very niche. It's just trying to find the right fit, but also then start opening up those channels to say, is there other applications or areas that we could apply the technology? So I think that's exciting, and
Hmm.
it's all fairly new, but it is exciting, and we're definitely taking advantage of some of the offerings and the promotions and events that you guys are putting on.
So you talk about your diverse team, and I was reading the stats. And by the way, there's a 50/30 challenge by the government of Ontario. I don't know if you've seen it, but you might want to look into that and getting that certification. I know that it's not quite ready for certification, but the program, the idea is in place and certification is coming. And it has to do with your leadership structure. And you talked about so much of your leadership being women and so
Mhm.
much diversity. So like why have is this something you did on purpose first of all, and if so why, and how, what, has it improved your product and your team? What's the benefits of diversity from your perspective?
Yeah, I think it was never like set up to say that we have to hit some number or target. And being in the federal government, they've always put really strong initiatives on that, which I think is great. I think it's just a natural kind of progress when you have a great culture and you emulate values that everyone shares in an inclusive way. It'll attract the right people that want to be a part of that. And then in turn, that gives you that diversity. So again, it was never like I look back and I think it was like three or four or five of us at the start, and we're all male,
Yes.
and then now it's blossomed into this amazing organization with so much out of the box thinking and perspective and different background. And I think really that's what charges the business or any business. And Forbes did an article, and they said that with diversity, you can start seeing companies actually grow by 35% in revenue and have a 70% more likelihood of expanding into larger markets. And we've seen that firsthand. So I'm a big
Right.
champion for really making a workplace where you can get as many different perspectives and eyes on a problem as you possibly can. And that I think makes for a great culture, great work environment, and great outcomes as a business.
Yeah, I'm on the same mind. I mean, we're a much smaller team at IWSCC, but when we take on a venture, like we just had our first annual forum for disabled entrepreneurs in Canada, for national, we're going to be doing that on an annual basis. Um, the whole team sat in on calls repeatedly to just discuss what are our ideas. And for me, because there's a huge age difference between me and our youngest team member, and so I like getting that perspective, and I learn a lot. So, we have diversity. I'd like to have more diversity with the team, but that includes the team growing. And of course, I'd like to do that also. And so, great organizations such as yourself joining IWSCC, I think is beneficial for both sides. So, what kind of support do you provide for diverse initiatives outside of the company? Like, is there other things that you're doing outside of your actual work and your internal staffing that you do that are in support of diversity in general?
Yeah, so we have an employee engagement committee, which we kicked off this year, and it's fantastic. So the team members basically volunteer, and for 3 months, for a quarter, they'll pick up initiatives or champion things that are really kind of dear to their heart. So in March, it was Women's History Month, and they really tackled that, and we sponsored Girls Who Code. So we really got
Oh,
behind how
cool.
do we start looking at the challenges that women have in tech and in breaking into the tech industry. And I think there's only about 30% of the workforce that are female within the tech segment. So, just championing some of these causes and, letting our team and the engagement committee really like speak on that, promote it, thought leadership behind it. And then every quarter we're doing something similar. And I think that's amazing because it not only gives the team the opportunity to speak about what they're really focused on and what they care about, but it also gives that education across the entire organization that maybe we weren't aware of that, right? Some people
Yeah.
aren't aware of these stats and the barriers to entry. So I think that's really important when you can actually get that at a root level internally, and then you can really emulate that externally. So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's like you're walking your talk.
Yeah,
basically.
exactly.
Yeah. Well, if you ever want to do anything within the disability sector, let me know. I can connect you with some good organizations. And I suppose you're probably well connected on your own in the veteran sector, but with disability, I'm happy to encourage some of that same type of outreach for that community. As we do our research on supplier diversity and including disabled and veteran businesses within supply chains, we see that they're vying, veterans and people with disabilities are vying for last and second last place in every research in terms of representation. So I think the more that we can just talk about these two great communities, which of course is largely what I do all day long, makes a big difference and is going to help to move that up the. I mean, I don't want to displace the other groups, but I kind of, I'd like to be a little higher than last and second last, but I'm happy to be included. So you're, as you mentioned before, a veteran. You're a founder of this company. I've read and listened to some of the things that you've said about how being a veteran really sort of facilitated and led you, prepared you to become the founder of a startup. And obviously, you're much further along than a startup now. Tell us a little bit about that. What you learned, the skills you learned in the military, and then also, I think, a little bit about what you learned in the military and why that led you directly to the type of work that you do with Wisedocs. I'd love to hear about both of those things.
Yeah, no, great question. And I think really veterans and military members have a unique skill set through the years of their training and cross training, and the adaptability I think is really critical, and perseverance. So it's quite a natural thing, or it was, that entrepreneurship is kind of the go to after your time in service. I mean, you look at the stats, post World War II, over 50% of businesses were veteran owned. Now it's 5 or less than 5%, which is really interesting. And you can start asking, more critical questions. What is happening, right? What has made that change? But I think at the core, what the military instills, it's a time tested organization for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And it's these skill sets and the camaraderie and the values, I think, that really builds great culture, great community, great teams, and great problem solving. And I think that's really where I jumped off the ledge there to try to go after something like such a big undertaking, because I just had that drive, that determination, and the skill sets that I learned while I was in serving with the Canadian Forces. So it's a great opportunity, and I'm really thankful for that, and that's what led me to tackle it. But really, it was more in the space. It had to do with my time with health services. And I just seen how difficult it was to process a claim for disability. And you had ill and injured members waiting months, if not years, before they were actually honorably discharged from medical-related injuries, occupational stress injuries, combat-related injuries. And that's really hard on them, right? They're trying to transition to a civilian life, and it's a tough process.
So okay. So let me see if I've got this straight, because I think I'm wrong. So they were living and still in the military actively with a disability, waiting to get discharged. Is that correct? That is
Yeah,
correct.
so that's correct. So there's a process, so the medical record has to be reviewed
Right.
to understand the state of disability or the state of the injury. And
Right.
that takes quite a while, because it is a process. There's multiple file reviews, there's clinicians looking at medical histories, and then Veterans Affairs is involved. So it is a process, and it can be a long one. Mine, before I was released, was over 18 months. So you kind of go into a process of limbo, and you're kind of waiting to say, well, am I in, or am I transitioning as a civilian? And the military does a great job of getting that training and that education, but it is a tough process, and that's really what I wanted to solve. Like, how can we speed up that file review? How can we give a couple days, a couple weeks, a couple years back to that individual so that they can get on with their life and have that autonomy?
Because I would think that sitting in limbo would lead to a progressed disability, for example, especially if they don't necessarily have access to medical support, and in particular, if it's a mental health disability or invisible disabilities, I would think that waiting time would exacerbate certain types of disabilities. Let's just put it that way. So what you're doing with Wisedocs speeds that whole type of process right up.
Yeah,
because it's
I would
easier to
say
access.
we're not specifically within Veterans Affairs, but like you can look at the insurance short term and long term disability in the same categorization.
Yeah, I'm
So we're
sure.
helping a
Yeah,
lot of the carriers in that way, yeah, and the claimants.
yeah, yeah, I'm sure. So tell us a little bit about your transition from military service to civilian life. Like, did you know while you were still, like before you released, did you know that you were going to be starting a business, and did you know that it would be this type of business? How did that all work out for you?
It
You
was.
see, your laughing's making me laugh.
I had no clue. I was like, it really came to a point where, okay, what's next? And again, to give credit where credit's deserved, the military does a great job on retraining and voc rehab, on the job training, education. So, very thankful for those opportunities. So I think it's really when I was in that kind of transition phase, it was okay. Well, what am I going to do? And I just seen this really big problem around the medical record and like how can we improve it? How can we make decisions faster? And I really had a passion for that, and completing my master's in health administration, it really kind of drove me down that path, and I took the leap. I thought it was absolutely crazy, but I looked at it, and I remember having a conversation with my father, and he said, "You can always go back and get a job. You're going to look back 10 years from now and say, I wish I took that shot." And I said, you know what? I'm going to do it. And I'm very thankful I did.
So, had you tried to get a job?
I had not. That was the process. So, and that was daunting too. I remember looking at,
Yeah.
I was, there was a lot of support through the transition process where they help craft your resumes and try to like place you and look at different things like that. But it's really tough in that environment where it's like, well, I don't really want to be relegated to work that I don't want to do, where
Mm.
it's very entry level, and the skill sets aren't really tied or matched. And I see that a lot with a lot of fellow veterans and colleagues, that they're highly, highly trained, highly skilled, and it's really difficult for them to find the right job. And that's why I'm employing veterans in tech with no tech experience, and I'm proud of
Yeah.
that. So you got to really open those doors. And I think that daunting barrier, it's really tough to say, like, I'm going to take a leap of faith, or I can just go and it's stable, right? I can find a job
Yeah.
that I may not like, it may not match my skill set, and I have so
Yeah.
much more to offer, but what are my options, right? So,
Yeah. When I started this organization, I just knew that it needed to be started. I really didn't know much about it. And I laugh at myself now when I think about all the things I thought were happening, would happen, and actually how it did happen. And, hindsight's 2020. Um, and so I started the organization recognizing the gap for folks with disabilities and understanding that there was an organization or several organizations in the States that support veterans in the same way. It hadn't occurred to me to put the two together. I was asked by a number of the corporate members that we work with if would I consider it. So I did some, I don't want to call it research. I looked around on the internet for quite a while, and I thought, okay, this does make sense. A high percentage of veterans do have disabilities, whether they're visible or invisible. And then I started to learn about the veteran experience, and I started to learn about just how difficult it is. And of course, it all makes sense once you know, but before you know, you don't know what you don't know. And
yeah,
I started to learn about how absolutely impossible it is for many veterans to be able to take everything that they did and put it down in a resume format that
right,
large, that anyone's really going to understand. How does the veteran take that terminology, that military terminology, and turn it into corporate speak? And so that's a really big struggle, if I understand correctly. And obviously, you would know better than I. Have you seen folks go through that type of struggle that maybe didn't choose entrepreneurship, or maybe go through that struggle and then choose entrepreneurship? What's your experience there?
yeah, I've seen it. Like I've actually really close colleagues, and that's why I've kind of put it, veteran centric hiring approaches too, to give those opportunities where you may not have tech experience, but I want to try to give you the opportunities to like get into these new industries. And I find the U.S. Definitely has much better programs in place. You've Oracle, Goldman Sachs, Boeing, and they're not looking for that textbook resume. They're looking at your skill sets that are maybe indirect that can be applied, because it's all those things I talked about before, like great work ethic, discipline,
Mm-hmm.
perseverance, ability to problem solve. And I think that's often really understated and not emphasized enough from the Canadian side of the border. And I think it does have a toll, and I've seen it firsthand on a number of colleagues. They actually are heading to the U.S. They're waiting for their visas. They're not staying in Canada because the jobs aren't there, where they can get higher paying, more skilled jobs in the U.S. that have offerings. So I'm not speaking anecdotally. I'm saying that's a fact. Like, I actually can count a number of my friends and colleagues that are doing that right now, which is a shame.
Yeah, it is a shame for sure. So you've talked a little bit about hiring veterans that don't necessarily have tech experience. And so I'm just wondering, maybe tell us a little bit more about that, but are there other ways that you're supporting veterans currently? And do you have sort of plans to do more support for veterans in the future? And you're actually the statistic that I often refer to when I talk to procurement people in the large purchasing organizations that IWSCC has as corporate members. And I talk to them about the decision-making process and how much making the decision to work with a veteran or a disabled organization has like this snowball effect on the economy, because many times folks with disabilities as well as veterans will go ahead and either hire folks within their community or subcontract, their supply chain becomes more veterans, more people with disabilities. And so I try to help them understand that just making this choice, this little choice, seems like a small thing to you, but it's turning into this fantastic economic snowball that's supporting these communities so well. And so you're just the advertisement for that. I just want to bring you along and show you every time I have that conversation. And also, if I can, you're the one supposed to be talking here, but when you're talking about the qualities of veterans, I love how much those also are qualities of folks with disabilities. I mean, you talked about the teamwork experience and that leadership thing that may not necessarily fall into the realm of the experience of entrepreneurs with disabilities, but all those other things you're talking about, problem solving and troubleshooting, and what I like to call like bounce back ability and over, under, around and through, like that perspective. I think that exists within both of these communities, which once again makes me happy in the decision that I made to align the two. So when it comes to bringing on veterans within your business community, be it employees or supply chain, what are you doing? You mentioned them hiring folks that aren't on paper qualified for that. How's that going, and what else are you thinking to do?
Well, it's phenomenal. Like, when you look at individuals that have no tech background, but they've spent their entire careers, decade plus, dealing with very complex equipment, complex tasks, just the ability to adapt and learn something so quickly, it's phenomenal. And I think it goes back to what you're saying is, like, anyone from a disability, from a veteran community, anyone who's marginalized, the barrier there pushes you harder and faster to prove that you can do it. And I think, and I commend that, because if it was easy, everyone would do it. The hard things actually kind of forge you and make you go faster and really test your grit. So I've seen that firsthand. And really what I'm trying to do, not only from the hiring perspective, but just become, more advocacy, more thought leadership, start working with a lot of programs that help veterans, partnerships. So that's on the horizon that we really want to kind of push forward. Like, is there internships? Is there ways that we can get more involved in the communities and really try to get the voice heard for those that need to speak, and just keep building really good teams, and that knock-on effects there. It's the loyalty and the dedication when you give someone that opportunity that they've always been told, no, you can't do that.
Yeah.
I can't put that even into words. The dedication that you get, it's a 100-fold. It's quite amazing, actually.
Yeah, I think when you let people sort of you plant them and give them a bit of water and then let them bloom, I'm always impressed and happily surprised by the people that I work with. I always hear folks my age, and I'm almost 60, and I hear them talking about, there's, generation this and millennials that, and nobody wants to work anymore. And I think, well, that is just not my experience. Like, I think perhaps you need to have another look around, because it's just, we find the same thing in every age category, the same behaviors and the same attitudes. But I think that it's really that type of diversity is super important from an age perspective, and obviously in our case, include those veterans and folks with disabilities in your world and within your supply chain. So I've enjoyed our conversation, and again, thanks so much for being here. I just want to ask, and this is always the question that I kind of end with, is like a genie in a bottle. So you're touring along on the veteran beach, and you see a veteran genie pop up, and he's like, "Okay, Connor, you have one wish for veterans in Canada and their circumstance, whether it's military transition, whatever it may be. What would you change? What would your wish be to help in that whole veteran circumstance area?"
That's a really good one. That's a very complex question.
I know it
Uh,
is.
but I really think it goes back to the value of the business and why we started it and why our team believes in what we're doing. It's really just trying to help that individual get autonomy, have a voice, have autonomy, get through the process quicker, and just live a really fulfilled life. And I think that's the thing. Disability and barriers really can retract from that. And I think that well-being is the key. So if we can help in that one little piece, I don't think the wish would solve all problems. But if I could say, hey, we can speed this entire process up end to end, and every veteran coming out of the service can apply their skill sets and have a purposeful and fulfilled life doing that, then that would be an amazing achievement.
Yeah, I love that answer. Actually, autonomy. I think it's so important. And again, in talking with veteran business owners and learning what each of them has a little bit of a different experience transitioning. And I had someone say to me when I've had this two different very highly placed veterans say to me, when I released, I didn't even know how to get health care. I was so used to just walking down the hall and then going and getting, doctor here, go pick up my pills there, and I'm gone. It's all within the same small building. And now someone's handing me a card and telling me that I have to. And another one said, I knew that I had an appointment, that I had, I needed to go see the doctor, but I didn't actually call to make the appointment. I just assumed someone else was going to do that and tell me when it was. And so, and so her family was laughing at her because they're like, "Come on, mom, like you have to do this yourself." And so it just helps me to really recognize that there's such a difference in terms of, military life and civilian life. And I think that autonomy thing is a really solid answer and something that is achievable, really.
Yeah.
And of course, by the way that you're doing it, that you're just getting us one step closer to that. So I thank you for the work that you're doing. I'm super happy that you're part of the IWSCC community and looking forward to you guys getting involved a little bit more and seeing your face more and more. I'm really interested to see the direction that Wisedocs goes. I was happy to hear that you're considering maybe taking on different types of work within, the same structure of what you do with the documents. So I'm excited to see where things move forward for you in the next 3 to 5 years. So thanks again, Connor, for being here.
Thanks so much. I really had a great time.
Yeah, me too. And we'll have to do it again. And we'll do it again next year. We'll see what's changed.
Yeah. Have fun.
All right. Thanks for being here, as I mentioned. And thanks, everyone, for watching and joining us today. For more information about supplier diversity and inclusion and all the things that we've talked about, veteran and entrepreneurs and disabled entrepreneurs, go to our website at www.iwscc.ca. You can find us on YouTube, these podcasts, or listen in on your favorite podcast platform. So thank you again to Pod Supply, Maple Communications Canada for providing our ASL, and of course RBC for sponsoring 2023 IWSCC's ASL communication. And last but not least, Connor for being here. Have a good day, everyone.